что, мы начинаем?
Shall we start then? Shall we start?
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me welcome you on the GAIDAR Forum 2021. We are having today the panel about post-pandemic Europe. We have very well balanced the panel of experts with different experience. We have high-ranking government officials. We have two experts, and the balance of countries also impressive. We have people from Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, and Central Europe. So welcome, everybody. I have a special question to each of the participants, but I have one general question. What is your perception? What would be the three most important challenges for Europe, for European Union in the current year? I guess if we'll have the four answers, we could compare and choose the priority of the issues which are on the mind of people, of the government, and in Brussels, of course. So let me start with Ivan Krastev. Ivan, look, the European risk assessment for the last year missed completely pandemic challenge. And as an outcome, shock and returning to the old national instincts among leading member EU states. Practically overnight disappeared such pillars of such institutional pillars as Schengen and Maastricht. People in Italy and Spain were much frustrated in the last year spring. And the biggest EU economies suffered from the lockdowns more than China, than EU or Russia. However, in the fall, Brussels overcomes initial shock and suggested very impressive economic package. Am I correct saying that demand for stronger Europe today prevail in the public mood? Is it also true, despite or maybe even thanks to Brexit, that this public mood prevail? So please, the floor is yours.
No, I'm going to agree with you. And also I have the data of the polling that European Council on Foreign Relations have been doing both in summer and now at the end of the year. And the major conclusion is that nevertheless, that many people have been disappointed with the initial reaction of the European Union, rightly or wrongly. The major conclusions that European got out of the crisis is that the European Union is a community of faith. All of these countries basically economically cannot survive in the absence of a bigger European market. So as a result of it, you have the recovery fund, which in my view was going to be unimaginable in the absence of the COVID-19. So from this point of view, the biggest challenge that European Union is going to face in the coming months is first, when we're going to see a normalization, particularly of the economic activities. And secondly, to what extent this normalization is going to be harmonized in the different member states. Because one of the interesting stories that, of course, the pandemic hit all, but it hit differently different member states. And how to prevent a kind of an uneven effect and uneven recovery, in my view, is going to be the major challenge. But I do believe you're right in your major assessment. At the end of the day, European Union gets more consolidated as a result of the pandemic shock, regardless of the first 1 month in which you have the feeling that basically European Union has stopped to exist.
Ivan, and what is the impact of Brexit on this mood?
Listen, Brexit in general disciplined Europeans in two ways. First, if you remember, basically in 2016, 2017, you have at least 16 major European parties that have been interested basically to go for an exit option, asking for the referendum, talking to go out for their own. And the reality of Brexit, basically some of the problems that the United Kingdom faced in the last 3 years made basically a situation in which there is not a single major European party that is now advocating Brexit. This is on one level. On the other level, the governments in the EU understood that they need a common position because Britain living, of course, is a major economic problem. And from this point of view, everybody understood that now the consolidation is the matter of survival for the European Union.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Wolfgang, now is your turn. Look, 6 years ago, I published an article where I expressed hypothesis that maybe emerging world order architecture would be bipolar. And since that time, we are facing many evidence about the US-China mounting rivalry. And clearly, this trend is not in the interest of Europeans as well as Russians. I guess one of the most visible outcomes of the COVID-19 was election of the 46th president of the United States. What does it mean for the future design of the world order, how it's seen from Vienna, from Brussels? Would it diminish the call for strategic autonomy and increased security dependence from United States, or this demand, this call for strategic autonomy would prevail, would survive the election of the 46th president? Please.
Thank you, Alexander, for this very interesting and good question. Not easy to answer, by the way. And many analysts say that the future is dominated by two global dominant and competing superpowers, America and China. In the rest of the world, middle powers like Russia, India, Japan, or Europe, European Union, cannot really play a significant role. I strongly disagree, by the way. I strongly disagree, because I think no superpower today can act alone. They need followers, they need partners, they need a friendly environment. And I think this is now our choice as Europeans, and I include now, of course, Russia, because you are European as well. I think we should not only think in Europe as EU 27, but Europe means much more. It includes the EFTA countries, Norway, Switzerland, UK, even after Brexit. It includes Russia, eventually also the Mediterranean area. And if you have in mind this wider Europe, then the interesting perception could be in the year 2050, this wider Europe would have the same global power in GDP like China, on par with China, 30% of the world GDP, and double as large as the United States. And I think this is something we should have in mind. But it means, of course, to be really autonomous, we have to develop some tools. For instance, we have to develop the euro as a competitor to the dollar as world reserve currency. If this is the case, then, for instance, the Eurozone members could raise their debts without rising or going up interest rates. We could challenge the United States, because no longer would it be possible that European banks should cover the losses of American firms, threatening if they don't do it, they would lose their licenses. And also the same with trade sanctions. If we have an alternative system like SWIFT, it would not be possible that the United States could monitor all international transactions done via SWIFT, and therefore nobody can really escape these threats. So I think to be really autonomous, there are some tools to be developed, and I think Europe has a challenge for that.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. And tell me, please, I still have in mind to collect all experts' opinions about the biggest challenges, biggest issues on the EU agenda in this year.
Yeah, look, first things first. The first priority, of course, is to win the fight against coronavirus and its mutations. This is the first priority. The second priority, and I think, by the way, now the EU is really in the driving seat, no longer the nation states. This is really a pan-European agenda, which is agreed by everybody. The second priority is, and Ivan already mentioned it, there is this huge amount of money, the Recovery and Resilience Facility with close to 2 trillion euro, and how to use it in a productive, sustainable, and better way. This is, in my opinion, the most important, significant challenge for the future. And of course, the third part is to develop partners outside the European Union, as I said it, including Russia and Africa, for instance, because I think the model is at stake. We have a better democratic model compared with China, and we have fewer divides than America. And if we could really create new existing and functioning partnerships, that would be an excellent way for the 21st century.
Thank you very much. Mr. Racha, let me turn to you. My take is that lockdowns, isolation, unpredictability in general, they provoked a lot of fears, a lot of public mistrust. We find it everywhere, and in Russia also, there is explosion of the very wild conspiracy theories. And it seems to me that responsibility after the and during pandemic is in a scarce supply. So, Mr. Racha, my question is, what is your take about populist movements in Europe during and after pandemic? Is it environment favorable for them? Are they gaining or losing ground? What is your perception? And second issue, looking from Moscow, I may confess that COVID-19 intensified the generation divide between, let's say, Zoomers and Silvers. This divide existed in many senses. Is it true for Finland and for Europe? What is your take about that?
Yeah, thank you so much. Interesting questions. I will start with this perspective for the populism or populist movements. I think we have to put that into the historic context. Always when we have a crisis, especially economic crisis and difficulties, populism is doing well. Populism is growing when times are difficult. And we have seen that in the US, we have seen that in Europe, we have seen that in Russia as well, in many countries. And I think the best method to oppose populism is to get things into the house, into the order, to return back to growth, to return back to better employment. And that's why what Wolfgang said about Europe's challenges, I think major challenges to get vaccinations, to get rid of this pandemic. But at the same time, we have to start thinking how to recover economically. And I think that we can do a lot in Europe, together with Americans, together with Russians, maybe together with Chinese as well, because economically we are interdependent. We need certain independence. Yes, that's right. Everyone wants to be independent as well, but they are not contradictory. I think that inside the European Union, greater independence for individual countries is not in contrary with interdependence among Europeans. We can increase our sovereignty by using common efforts. And I'm optimistic that we are having capacity to recover quite rapidly now. But it's very fundamental issue how we will spend the money. How we will spend these billions or hundreds of billions we are going to spend. I have two priorities, digital and bio, or sustainability. I think these are the critical areas in Europe. We can speak about that a bit later, hopefully, in a more detailed way. Secondly, about this generational issue, I think we have not fully understood what kind of challenge aging of population is going to be. It's already there in Japan, it's in Finland, it's in Russia. By the way, China is getting the same challenge or has got that challenge already now. So we have to be able to change the social model in a way that we will better integrate senior citizens into our economic and social model. And that's why I think this pandemic situation has made it a bit more difficult to get good understanding of how to create this silver economy, how to move into the silver economy. And I'd like to add that into the agenda because I believe that those countries who are able to create real silver economy, able to integrate senior citizens in the economic model, they are going to be big winners in the future.
Well, I guess it's true for Finland, but for example, for Turkey, they have unbelievable birth rate, something like 1 million a year. So for them is the problem, the occupation for the youngsters. This is very different challenge for those type of countries. Of course, Russia in this sense, in sense of fertility, much closer to Finland.
Yeah.
But I find out that, so-called Zoomers and the people of our generation, we are losing some common space of understanding because they are living completely in the social nets, in Wikipedia and so on and so forth. And we are still more attuned to the books, how to overcome this gap.
You are right that there is this kind of gap. But if you look at the potential of digital technologies, we can bridge that gap. And I have seen a lot of examples how senior citizens have been able to start using these new technologies. But the problem is that companies until now, they have seen the market only among young people. But the fact is that senior citizens are a huge market for digital solutions in the future. The question is that they have to change the business model. I'm quite confident that there is a market. Market drive will be a solution. By the way, about Turkey is a good example of aging challenges. On the short term, you are right. They have a huge supply of young labor force. But even in Turkey, there is a decline in birth rate. India is another good example. India there are hundreds of millions of young people in India, but birth rate has come down so that it's only 2.5 now. It's very close to sustainability rate already. Actually, there is only one region in the world having population growth on the longer term, and that is Africa. All other regions in the world are going to face aging challenges.
Thank you, Mr. Rach. Franco.
Yeah.
Look, COVID-19 used to be a common challenge, common threat. And at the same time, it did not overcome the continent divide. On the contrary, looking from Moscow, it looks like that pandemic cemented Europe just from Lisbon to Tallinn. We also see this different attitude to different vaccines and so on and so forth. So this, let's say, limited Europe. Is it enough for the sustainable recovery? Agenda is not waiting for us. The Karabakh crisis have been frozen by Moscow with, let me say, shiny absence of the European Union despite Eastern Partnership and so on and so forth. And for me, it looks like both Moscow and Brussels consider today Russia apart from Europe, but not as a part of Europe. What is your thinking about those issues with all your experiences?
Many thanks, Alexander. This is a very key question, which is maybe simply aggravated by the pandemic, but it was and it is still on the table among the priorities of Europe. In order to address this very important issue, I would say strong leadership is needed in Europe. And frankly speaking, except Germany leadership, I don't see a real commonality of positions and intent about that, particularly while dealing with Russia, while dealing with the difficult situation in the Middle East, what is happening with the Abraham Pact, what will be happen with the new president of the United States. Unfortunately, I see still some divisions. So in my view, priorities for Europe in the near future are at least three. First of all, to show concrete capacity to recover, as Wolfgang rightly said, while combining solidarity among the member states with homework, because very much will depend on how the European funds will be spent, not on subsidies, on the contrary, on added value initiatives like infrastructure, relaunching education, mitigating imbalances, because the previous question you put, Alexander, is very important for us in Italy. We feel the imbalances between the younger and the older generations. We run the risk to have the youngest pupils in the schools deprived from a normal school year. It happened in 2020. It is very difficult to regain ground when you have lost a year and you are a 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old young pupil. So relaunching education, mitigating this divide between generations, spending very well the fund from European Recovery Fund, and not to lose sight on the previous challenges. They are still there. What about the global security issues? What about the environment challenge in a moment where President Biden apparently wants to re-enter the COP25 Paris Agreement? What about Mediterranean, as rightly Wolfgang alluded to, with the Libya situation where Russia was very, I would say, active to regain ground in Libya, while Europe has been losing ground. On the contrary, for Europe, this is our neighborhood. And so our priorities should be not only the simple recovery from the pandemic, but capacity to show leadership. I stress the point of leadership because if we are still on the policies based on new tariff, new sanction, reciprocal retaliation, we go to nowhere. I strongly hope that President Biden will rethink about this sanctions-based policy that is leading to nowhere except to the new chaos, like it is in Mediterranean, like it is in the broader Middle East, like it is in the friction with Turkey. We are doing everything to push Turkey in the hands of Iran and China. Is it in the interest of Europe? It is not. We have an interest to have Russia, Europe, and the protagonists in Mediterranean working together, because otherwise, if you leave in the hands of Russia and Turkey only the destiny of Libya, what about Europe? So let's think about pandemic. Let's think about a common policy of vaccination in Europe. Let's not forget all the previous challenges that are still there.
Thank you very much, Franco. It's very, very deep answer. My take is that, look, the Libya is a, let's say, we'll go to the historical textbook as a terrible disaster. from the beginning, because they were violated the United Nations resolution, you know, all the story. And still the lady who was responsible in great deal in Washington, D.C. for this story, she was among the possible nominees for the new administration, unfortunately. So it's a long story. One puzzle bothers me after our initial conversation, that only Franco mentioned environment. No Wolfgang, no Ivan, no Mr. Acha, they did not mention the green growth. This is the key issue as it explained by Brussels. Why this situation we are facing? Mr. Acha, you would like to answer? Mike, please.
Yeah, that's right. Now it's there. So I mentioned that, but I used the wording bio because I have a special interest to speak about that because I really believe that we are going to see a rather radical change in that area. There are three reasons for that. First reason is that this Green Deal in Europe is a very ambitious plan, and if it is executed well, I think it will have a major impact. Secondly, we have huge bioresources in Europe, Russia as well. We have huge opportunities to move to a new type of economic model. But the third reason is linked to the US situation. We can see, I think, at least two positive consequences of this new administration coming next week. And first one is predictability. There is going to be more predictability in the future, and it's good for all. I think in the short term, maybe previous administration was optimal for some players in the world, but on the longer term, not at all. Because America should be predictable, and I think we are going to get more predictability. And the second reason is that now, like mentioned, US is coming back to the table. And I believe that this environmental challenge, opportunities to create new technologies urgently needed, I think it will be benefiting a lot when America is going to be on board.
It's interesting that I'm looking at statistics before our meeting, and the crude oil prices goes down in comparison with 2019 by 22%. And the gold prices increased the same amount, also 22% with the comparable year. Look, regarding predictability, I share completely that it looks like the Democrats, especially Mr. Biden, they would be more predictable. But when we are having our internal debates here in this town, such question arises. Predictability, yes, but for how long? Till 2024? What is your thinking about that?
I think it's a good question, and I think it's too early to say anything what is going to happen on the longer term. I think the Republican Party is going to face now major challenges, and I'm quite confident we are going to see rather radical changes in that party. I really hope that there is going to be some kind of collaboration between moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans. That is what would be best for not for America only, but for us as well, if there is going to be that kind of future development. Is it going to happen? I think there are some indications showing that probably this experience will lead to that kind of development, and that will increase predictability.
Look, in Moscow existed expectations that with the new administration would be much more easier to reach the agreement about extension of the START treaty.
Yeah.
And that was in the election agenda of Mr. Biden.
Yeah.
Recently, a couple of days ago, I spoke with our ambassador in Washington and asking about that. He says zero, nobody requests anything. Everybody concerned with this transition, with all these bolts and nuts we all watching by TV. So this is a bit contradict the idea that we are having the very predictable president. And you understand that if those treaty would not be extended, that it would be long consequences of events regarding this year conference of non-proliferation and so on and so forth. So this is general question. Maybe Wolfgang, Ivan, Franco would take. What is your take about the possibility? Because this START treaty expires February 5th formally. So we have a very short period of time.
So if I may say something, look, all politics is local or domestic, and especially in America today, nobody is today really interested in foreign policy. They are interested how to get rid of Trump. I personally welcome, of course, the change in the American government, but I do not expect major shifts in foreign policy. I mean, China is still seen as a strategic threat to America. Russia is de facto also seen in a very hostile way. I was 1 year ago in America, in the Senate and Congress, and I was really surprised by the unanimous support of an absolute negative approach and view on Russian politics in all parties, in both parties. There is no difference. And also this America first, this sanction-oriented policy, this keeping their own interests in the forefront economically, this will not change. So I think what we should do is really what Franco and also Ivan and Esko said, we should really stick to our own priorities. One is to cover and to fight the pandemic crisis, to recover our economy, and to create new partnerships. This is the important thing. And you mentioned the decarbonization and the climate agreement. Look, I think this is, by the way, one of the most fascinating and promising areas of an EU-Russian cooperation. Because look, I just recently, a few minutes ago, I listened to Prime Minister Mishustin's statement in the Ranepa conference, and he said it. So Russia is part of the climate agreement. It means commitment to reduce emissions. Yeah. Mishustin said Russia will change, not only being dependent on fossil fuels, but also in petrochemical industry, renewables, etc. And Europe could add a lot to that. We have an enormous expertise in the Nordic countries, in Germany, about renewables, in this transaction and this transmission shift towards a more sustainable energy system. Russia has an enormous potential, for instance, in hydrogen strategy, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen with gas, turquoise hydrogen, yellow hydrogen. The same with carbon storage utilization and all this CCUS strategy. We cannot do it in our countries, but Russia has the expertise, the knowledge and the possibilities. And by the way, also the compensation measures, forestation. We can't do it in Europe, in Central Europe. Russia has an enormous potential. So why not use this interesting and fascinating area in so extending Ursula von der Leyen's decarbonization deal in a pan-European Green Deal, EU plus Russia and our neighbors. That would be a fascinating story.
Yeah, if I may say one thing, to say that not only I agree fully with Wolfgang, but exactly on the START treaty renewal, I think also here European Union has a great potentiality in cooperation with United States, because we are mostly members of NATO. President Biden, you know, apparently, and I'm sure, wants to relaunch cooperation in terms of security and strategic security between the two shores of the ocean, despite what has been done by President Trump. In that moment, Europeans and NATO members pushing over the new president of the United States to say, is it possible that in a moment of multiple crises in the world, we keep the risk to have unrenewed START treaty on the proliferation? Is it possible that we miss the opportunity to work together, we Europeans, you American, and our Russian friend, to agree on the strategy for the reduction of dangerous and nuclear weapons? So spontaneously, Wolfgang is right, it's difficult for the new president to change suddenly all the policies of his predecessor. The same will apply on the tariffs policy. It's illusory to think about a new negotiation about a EU-America free trade space. You will remember the failure of the negotiations promoted by President Obama. Why? Because each and every senator and the member of Congress has his or her constituency, and their constituency are not in favor of liberalizing many sectors. Different is the situation concerning global security, because on global security, the new president will have to decide what to do with the agreement with Iran on the nuclear strategy, what to do with the reconciliation that I welcome between Israel and Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states, but he has to do with the cooperation of Europe. The same applies to START. So this is the reason, Alexander, why I think Europe can have a role also on promoting a new debate about the need for having a new START treaty expiring, unfortunately, already in February, and just to avoid to run the risk to have another terrible threat to global security, which is the absence of a comprehensive treaty on non-proliferation. So again, Europe can do something in cooperation with the two pillars, the Eastern European pillar, Russia, and the Western Atlantic pillar, America.
Can I enter on this?
Sure,
because
sure.
there is something interesting. If you see the performance of the American stock market, and if you basically see what is happening in politics, we're in an interesting world. In a certain way, American stock market is overperforming than ever, because they live in the future. In a certain way, people are already buying the cars that are not produced, I mean electric cars. On the other side, when you look at politics, people are very much preoccupied with the past. And I agree with you that, of course, the position of the President Biden is going to be difficult and we should not have over expectations. But the biggest problem is what kind of agendas others also has to the United States. On the European side, we basically obviously decided to focus on two things. One is the regulation of the technological giants. So this is where basically European Union is very much going, and this is an important story. And honestly speaking, what happened in the recent days even can very much strengthen European position that it's up to the government to deregulate and not up to the companies to do it. And the other is climate, because climate is also the problem with the next generation. And I very much agree that particularly when we're taking so much debt, to ignore basically the next generation is going to be a major issue. You are borrowing money from people, but because this new generation is not particularly numerous, when they go to voting, their vote is not as strong as it used to be. But if this is the case, part of the problem is, and this is my question to Russia, is that I also have the feeling that Russia does not have a positive agenda to the United States. Outside of START, what you're saying, because let's be honest, after this hacking story with the American institutions, obviously cybersecurity is going to come. And if this was the welcome for Biden, this is not the best one. And of course, I do believe Russia did recently relatively well compared also with many European countries when it comes to COVID. But the Navalny story really hurt, particularly in places like Germany. So my feeling is that now everybody expects Biden to do this or that and so on, but it is an interesting moment for others to try and to understand what is doable and not doable. On European side, I don't believe, by the way, that Europe is going to decouple from the United States and turn to Russia and Turkey for many reasons, and one of them is also technology. There is a certain type of a technological dependence which is there, but Europe, of course, is going to be very much interested to facilitate any normalization of the relations between the United States and Russia, for sure. This is European strategic interest. But my question to you, Alexander, is I know that many people in Moscow have a very hostile view of the Biden administration, but listen, being hostile could be a full-time job, could be a part-time job. Is there a positive agenda outside of the START treaty when it comes how Russia sees its relations with the United States?
Look, my take is that, of course, I could not represent the whole Moscow opinions. I guess, and my hope is that we'll go back with our relations with the United States to the old normality, not the new, but to the old. When we have some negotiations, some agreements, some disagreements in the sphere of strategic stability, in the field of security, and of course it would be continuing competition in all other areas. But at the same time, look, currently United States, the trade with United States is growing. For the last year, 2019, it grew up by 5%, and despite all these bolts and nuts, and currently United States is the 5th trade partner for Russia. So I guess that, you know, there are plenty of different type of relations. Some are completely negative, but some people-to-people relations still remains. The key issue, of course, the strategic issue, because if we did not manage to extend this treaty, it opens the Pandora box. We could count the next in line for proliferation, you know all these names. So this, let's say, open this Pandora box would be a very bad recipe, I guess, for the future of the globe. But I agree, and Franco said that leadership is the key word. But look, in September, there would be the elections in Germany.
Yeah.
So in the sense of leadership, what does it mean? The next year would be election in France. So I guess that leadership is in a scarce supply. And maybe we have not to expect the leadership. It have to be something new in the, let's say, expression of the European common perception and common demand for both to the United States and to Russia. Mr. Racha, I see you would like to take the floor.
I have one comment on leadership. I understand, I agree that it's important to have strong leaders who are ready to take decisions. But I think in the European Union, the fundamental issue is that we have not fully understood what is the foundation of power. Foundation of power is not political will. Foundation of power is not political infrastructure. The foundation of power is scientific, technological, and innovative capacity of the country. And by the way, the United States is still the strongest country in the world. In spite of all what has happened in recent days, we have to remember that that is the case still today. China is close, but America is still having that potential. Europe has made fundamental mistakes since 1990s, not investing enough in this potential. Hopefully now, when we have this 750 billion to be used, hopefully they will be used in a way that our potential will grow.
Yeah.
Well, I agree, because these technological giants of the United States, if we combine their capitalization and compare with Chinese technological giants, the score would be 5-1. And they use this, let's say, advantage. And of course, you remember that the left wing of Democratic Party, they suggested the divide of these gigantic companies. And it's not easy story, because I look back to the history and find out that dividing of the Standard Oil, it took something like 14, 15 years. in the beginning of the 20th century. And the influence of those companies much bigger, much wider, much deeper than the influence of Standard Oil with the simple technology.
Five companies having 25% of the market cap of stock market company.
Yeah.
25%.
But Alexander, may I say something?
Sure.
Because I don't want to miss what Ivan Krastev tried to bring into the debate. I think it's not. We are always looking to the others, but same goes for Russia. Russia has to develop her own strategy. So it's easy to blame somebody. Not? Of course, the Americans are hostile, the Europeans are skeptical, etc. But what is also needed to build lasting and functioning partnerships is, so to say, is a change in behavior, in the language, in the tone, in the efforts to build bridges and to use different channels to communicate. I think this is important. Same goes for us, of course. That I personally see in the future not so much only competing powers. Esko is completely right. The Americans will still be our partner in some areas, but also a competitor. And we have to challenge them in different areas. You mentioned the tech companies. Not everything what they are doing is correct according to our European values and standards. And the same is in Russia. The same is in China. So what is necessary in the future is changing and lasting bridges, partnerships in different areas. And what, in my opinion, is important is to create opportunities, not only threats and problems. There are so many uncertainties in the world, and I think a little bit more optimism, a little bit more possibilism to make it possible to talk to each other, to develop exchange of views of students, of scientists. And by the way, Russia, with their richdom of scientists in digitization, you are much more advanced, for instance, than Germany or Austria. In decarbonization, maybe the Europeans, the EU is more advanced. So let's do it together. Let's create, not neglecting what divides us, but so to say, really thinking what is possible together. This is something what I really promote. And there's also an answer needed from the Russian side towards Europe, towards China, towards America. And I think a kind of an open society, an open, tolerant and productive society in the 21st century should obviously include all players on the global scene.
Wolfgang, I agree absolutely, and as you know, I'm also trying to promote as much as I can the same attitude. But look, what is the mood prevailing currently in this town? That this mood sometimes reminds me the behavior of the former wife. If the West is so bad, let's turn all our eyes to the East. We have a great friend over there. And that's it. It's simplistic answer. I call it the former wife answer. And there are plenty of experts who share this and promote this very, very strongly. I don't know how many times we still have. I'm enjoying the comfort, the communication, the exchanging with you, because it's very scary opportunity, as you know, to have such a possibility. So if we look, let's say, in 2030, what would be your guess? Would be those divide along the line between Bucharest towards Tallinn existed, increase it or diminish it? What would be your opinion?
If I may say one thing, Alexander, first of all, the precondition is to have a vision reaching 2030, because in many cases we have a limited vision. I speak for my country. Unfortunately, we run the risk to have plannings concerning the next 3 years, the next 4 years, 5 years. If you think about the Chinese vision can serve the next 35 years, 40 years. So we have first of all to change our mental approach. We Europeans have to start considering what will happen in the hands of those that are now the pupils in the primary schools. If not, if we don't invest in the younger generations, if we run the risk to lose a generation of students because of all what has been said about this divide between the older and the younger, we run the risk to fail on elaborating a vision. My idea is, provided that there is a vision that I see only in the field of environment, because the Paris Agreement is a visionary agreement, well extended in the temporary range, but except on that, for example, on internal market, I continue what Wolfgang started to say. We don't have European champions. We don't have companies that are formed by European, the national member states industry going together, capable to compete with Chinese or Russian or American champions. So completing our European common market is one of the elements to look at the next 20 years. And the other precondition is Europe has to decide if Europe wants to be autonomous in pursuing its interests or simply following one of the two sides, in the East or in the West. I was very critical vis-à-vis the sanctions imposed by President Obama that Europe followed critically without a political discussion. I hope that there will be the possibility to regain ground in terms of autonomous role of Europe helping America, not simply following America in the relation with Russia as well as with China. Europe and America together can create a common position vis-à-vis China, much better than fight against China. But if you are divided and Europe alone signs a bilateral Europe-China agreement, embarrassing President Biden, who didn't know about that before the signature, we are about, I would say, making a mistake. So my vision in 2030 is a Europe stronger politically, but also capable to have, I would say, an economic role, not simply by following one side one time, another side another time. Having our choices. That could be, it's not just a dream, it's a possibility, but provided that we invest now on the younger generation. Otherwise, we will come to 2030 not prepared.
I see. Ivan, you would like to take the floor?
Listen, I do believe that paradoxically, pandemic also can help in certain type of restructuring that we talked about. I'm just going to give you two examples. One is because of what happened, you see quite a lot of people moving out of the big cities and going to the rural areas. If you see politically, the major divide in Europe, by the way, is not between East and West. The major political divide in Europe is between the rural areas and the major metropolitan centers. Secondly, when I see at Central and Eastern Europe, as a result of the pandemics, you have the return of a lot of basically people who wanted to work in the West. For example, around 200,000 Bulgarians came back. And we're talking about countries which have a huge problem on their labor markets, a lot of tensions on the labor markets. And thirdly, in a certain way, digitalization was a trend, but this trend, when it comes to the pandemic, it's like moving from a normal train to a speed train. Everything went very much digitalized. So from this point of view, now we see much more the problems that the pandemic has created. But even this kind of a generational divide, it's good that we see it. Because my problem was that before we even not seeing it, we're trying not to recognize it. We're not recognizing that one of the biggest problems, and I will end on this, of the aging societies is that they becoming risk averse. And this is a problem for Europe. Because we're democratic countries, you go as far as your population is going to allow you to go. For Europe, the biggest challenge these days, in fact, is not to go here and there. If you listen to our leaders, the idea of the European sovereignty is that we want to play a much more active role. Reading the opinion polls, to be honest, for many Europeans, the talk about European sovereignty is that applying for early retirement from power politics. We want to be left alone. We don't want to be part of this. We don't want to be part of that. This is the major problem for the aging societies, is how to get re-energized. We should fall in love with the future, because unfortunately my feeling is that we fear the future too much in order to be successful.
It's much easier to say than to implement. Look at Japan. Japan is...
But Europeans traditionally, we are famous for falling in love. So probably we can do it better than the Japanese.
But Alexander,
I have a good example from Finland that aging and innovativeness are not opposing each other's. We have a so-called Slash event here in Finland. It's one of the biggest, maybe the biggest startup event in the world. Unfortunately, it was not able to be organized last November, December. It's a huge event, and we have a startup boom in this country, and we are suffering from aging. So this is one of the first countries in Europe to meet the challenge of aging. So I don't believe that it's contradictory, but we have to have a right kind of model. And I'd like to use the same wording like Wolfgang. There are three options. You can be optimist, pessimist, or possibilist. I think we have to become possibilists. And unfortunately, we have seen now a lot of difficulties for possibilities in the world. Everyone has tried to America first, Russia first, China first, India first, Turkey first, and so on. We have this type of agenda actually almost in every corner of the world. And I think we have to understand better what is the interaction between independence and interdependence. We need both. And finally, I think what we have seen with this pandemic is how important, and also when looking at the US events, rule-based systems are surviving. If the system is rule-based, it will survive. And I think that is one asset in Europe which we have to start using much more than what we have done. We have still rule-based societies, and I think it's a great asset for the future. So I'm not pessimist or optimist about 2030, but I'm possibilist, and I can see a lot of positive things to come if we are clever enough to take them.
Alexander, may I add something?
Sure.
I fully agree with Esko, of course, but also on the question of leadership, we should not look back to the old days where strong leaders like Churchill or whoever run, so to say, the show. This is over, in my opinion. We have now the possibility with the digitization and with the new tools and the new generation, there is now really the need for a new type of leadership. By the way, we have in Austria one of the youngest prime ministers, and he is doing quite well. I think there is no need, you mentioned the German election. I'm sure there will be a strong chairman of the CDU coming out of Saturday's election or pre-election. But I think a new type of leaders is necessary, not looking back to the old days of confrontation, but really a more fluid way of cooperation, not confrontation, but cooperation, not head-to-head, but hand-in-hand cooperation. And by the way, history teaches us that no wall lasts forever. All walls are crumbling. The Chinese wall crumbled. Believe me, also the Texan wall, what Trump now signed, will also crumble. There is no need for that. We are an open society in the 21st century. We have one planet and we have to work together. And by the way, we should also look for the neighborhood, not Brussels or Berlin and Rome and Helsinki and Vienna is much closer to Moscow than Beijing, by the way, or Washington. So I think we should really use the closeness and the neighborhood to create not walls, but bridges to each other. This is my proposal, and this is also my vision as a possibilist like Esko.
Yeah, you know, speaking about possibilities, I learned the day before yesterday that Finnair opened the flights from Helsinki to St. Petersburg. Yeah. It's long expected event in some people from St. Petersburg. So there is some options, but I agree with Wolfgang that we could not wait until such people like De Gaulle or, I don't know, Willy Brandt would return. I guess we're already behind these stories. And of course, social nets, they change a lot, including politics, which is scaring me that here in this town, there are some so-called influencers with millions of followers. And the values they, let's say, disseminate is pretty far from what Wolfgang saying, Franco or Ivan. So this is also, let's say, negative side of these social nets. So I have a signal from our organizers that we are too talkative, and this is the time to say goodbye. I appreciate all of you. It's a great pleasure to see all of you on the screen. I hope to see you in person, and we are going to have, if nothing happens, we are going to have Primakov's reading 8-9 June, and you are most welcome to participate. Thanks a lot, good luck, and be healthy.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.